So there are 5 valued sips in this world and the other. One is the sip from fresh running water. One is a sip from the waters of a deep well. One is a sip from water blessed in a temple. One is a sip from a river running with stout beer. But the most desired sip is the sip from the wine of promise shared at a passionate wedding. After the wedding, all the wine having been drunk by the drinker, the food eaten by the eater, the bath well prepared by sharp frost. Remember, Vasilissa had said, I think my father is angry at you, and he may do us evil. I think we should leave. And the prince said, let's go. They mounted horses and they galloped out of the kingdom of the Sea King into an open plain, and were going along the road for a short time or a long time or whatever time it was, until Vasilissa the Wise said to the prince, get down now and put your ear to the ground and see if pursuers are following us. The prince got down and put his ear to the damp earth, and he said, I hear nothing. Vasilissa the Wise dismounted herself, put her ear to the damp earth, and said, I can hear pursuers coming quickly behind us. And so she turned the horses into a well. She turned herself into a ladle floating on the water in the well, and she turned the prince into an old man standing by the well. The pursuers came riding up, and they stopped. And they said to the old man, have you seen a good youth and a lovely maiden traveling this way? And the old man said, seen. I suppose by seen you mean looked at. I suppose that you mean observed, measured, spied upon, reviewed. I suppose you mean something after the order of looking down into the depression made by the hoof of a horse in the damp earth, and judging whether that horse was ridden by a good youth, perhaps, or maybe it was ridden by a lovely maiden. I suppose that's what you mean by seen. You mean something about the vision that one has when they look into the depression of a hoof in a dark earth. If that's what you mean, then I have seen. On the other hand, you may mean seen in the way that one sees the wind, although you can't really see the wind because the wind itself is invisible. You can only see it in the way that you can hear the wind in a whistle. You can only see it in the way that the leaves move on the branch. And I guess you could say, if you studied the patterns of the leaves moving, you could observe that one of them may be a good youth and one may be a lovely maiden. I suppose you mean a vision of that type. The pursuers said, enough, enough, enough. They mounted their horses. And they returned to the kingdom of the Sea King. And the Sea King stared them with a hard look. And they said, no. We found neither traces nor tidings of the prince and Vasilissa the Wise. The only things we found were a well with a ladle floating on the water and an old man babbling by the side of it. And the Sea King said, well, why then did you not bring them? They had no answer, and so he had them killed in a permanent way. And then he called forth some more messengers and sent them out on their horses, and they went riding out. Meantime, Vasilissa the wise and the prince were traveling along their path, galloping on their horses, when Vasilissa the wise said, "Prince, dismount now and put your ear to the ground." Now, which ear do you think it was? Take a picture. The prince got down, put his ear to the ground, and he said, "I hear nothing." Vasilissa the wise dismounted and put her ear to the damp earth, and she said, "I hear pursuers coming, and coming on quickly." And so she turned the prince into an old priest, and she turned herself into an ancient church with stones that were crumbling, with moss growing on them and weeds growing up around it. And along came the pursuers, and they came up to the church, and they saw the old man, and they stopped, and they said, "Have you seen a good youth and a lovely maiden traveling in this direction?" And the old man said, "Seen? I suppose that you mean, have I had a vision of them? The fact is, I have. And the vision I had of them was in the time of my youth. It was in the time when, as a youth, I built this church that you see here crumbling now with moss growing on it. And at that time, I stood near it, and I stood in this manner, except it was my left foot that was forward that I was leaning on. And I no longer stand that way. And you know, it's because of the injury that I got in my left knee, so that I can't put my weight on it anymore at all. So I have to lean this way on my right leg. And of course, that just aggravates the problem that I have on the left side of my chest, which I got that time, remember, in the war. And they said, "No, enough. And they go, and they went back to the Sea King, and he stared them with a hard look. And they said, "No. We found neither trace nor tidings of the prince and Vasilissa the wise. The only things we found at all was a crumbling ancient church with an old maniacal priest standing next to it." And the Sea King said, "Why did you not bring them back?" And they said, "Nothing." And so he had them killed in a despicable and permanent manner. And then the Sea King mounted up his own horse, and he set off in pursuit of Vasilissa the wise and the prince. And of course, they stopped to listen, and the prince heard naught. But Vasilissa the wise, when she heard, said, "I believe it is my father come now, galloping on his heavy horse." And so she turned the horses into a river of dark, stout beer, and into banks made of rich bread pudding. She turned the prince into a fine drake, and she turned herself into a gray duck, the two of them floating down the river of stout beer. The Sea King approached the river. He saw the beer, he smelled the pudding, he stopped, and he began to eat of the banks of the river, and he began to drink of the beer of the river. And he ate some, and he drank some, and he ate some more, and he drank some more, and he ate and he drank until he very well burst asunder and gave up the ghost. And Vasilissa the wise and the prince continued on. And they went on for a short time or a long time or whatever time that they went on, until they came in sight of the castle of the father and mother of the prince. Do you remember? The king and the queen with the red coffer and the green coffer. And they came in sight of that garden in front of that castle, and they stopped again. And Vasilissa the wise said, "You go forward by yourself. As for me, I will wait here in the road. You tell them what has happened and return for me. But remember my words. Greet everyone well and kiss everyone, but do not kiss your sister, or else you will forget me. The prince went forward, entered the castle of his mother and father, and greeted everyone there and kissed his sister as well. Three days, Vasilissa the wise waited on the road, heard nothing and saw nothing of the prince. And so, on the fourth day, she went to the town and went to the house of a certain old woman. She entered in there and stayed with that old woman. Now, the next day, the old woman began to bake. She took out the flour and began to sift it. And Vasilissa the wise said, "Why are you baking today?" And the old woman said, "Do you not know that the son of the king and the queen will be married today to a rich queen that the father and mother have chosen has come from a distant land? And everyone is invited to the wedding and the feast therein, and everyone must bring a cake made of wheat. And so I am beginning to bake my cake." And Vasilissa the wise said, "Well, grandmother, I'd like to bake a cake as well." And the old woman gave her flour and said, "Bake away." And so Vasilissa the wise began to bake a cake. And into this cake, she put some curd cheese and 2 doves. And then she baked it. In the evening, when the feast was in full swing, the old woman and Vasilissa the wise went to the marriage feast. It was well underway. Knife had gone into meat. Drink had gone into horns. The drums were playing. The fiddles were playing. And wheat cake was being eaten. When the wheat cake that was baked by Vasilissa the wise was brought forward and opened, as soon as they cut it, 2 doves flew up into the room. And then the she-dove descended, grabbed the curd cheese from the cake, and flew off again. And the he-dove said, "Little dove, give some cheese to me as well." And the she-dove said, "No, for if I do, you will just forget me the way the prince has forgotten Vasilissa the wise." And as soon as the prince heard that, he jumped up from the table, took Vasilissa the wise by her white hands, and seated her beside him. And the feast continued, only this time it was once again the wedding of the prince and Vasilissa the wise. And at that wedding, they served cask after cask of dark, stout beer. And I was assigned the task to take some of that dark beer and to bring it here to be shared at the banquet tonight. The trouble is, along the way, I stumbled and I hurt an old wound in my left leg, which aggravated a situation in my left chest, which inflamed a tooth in the lower part of the left side of my mouth, which caused me to forget to bring the casks, for I left them in the airport, and we won't be able to drink them at all. That's the thing where you're supposed to end with something that, takes the inflation out of the story. Yeah. Maybe what we could do is work backwards a little bit through the story and deal with this and then work back to the other sections and look at them. Often the meat of a story is in the middle, and the endings tend to be often, wonderful. They lived happily ever after, or, they were happy till they had a child or whatever. And the actual issue or the meat of the story is somewhere before that. The happy endings aren't the point. The process, I guess you would say, is the point. So, the three things, for instance, that Vasilissa the Wise turns herself and the prince and the horses into, the three things. How about some comments on those things? Roy.
The drake and the duck are made for life.
Very good.
What?
The drake and the duck mate for life. Caught that image.
So did the church and the priest.
Yeah, that's true. The priest is married to the church.
But the church is crumbling.
Hmm?
Yeah, the church is crumbling. So
It's an ancient... Huh? So is the priest. And the water, the ladle on the water, or the water in the well as well. Yeah. What else in those?
There was sustenance in the well, and that kind of alluring sustenance in the third in the river and the south. No sustenance in the middle.
or spiritual sustenance.
Yeah, there's the, very good, spiritual sustenance. Mythologically, what's being said, it's talking about the unions that have occurred. There's been this marriage in there. And then it's talking about the marriage that's between the prince and Vasilissa the Wise. They're married the way a priest is to the church. It's a spiritual marriage. They're married the way the water is to the well, or the ladle is to the water, or the old man is to the water in the well. They're mythological symbols. The well is the well of wisdom. It's the old well that can be dipped down into where the wisdom is. And then the spiritual church is pretty clear.
It was strange that when they returned to the king, they described the well as the ladle. I thought they said floating on the well, on the water.
The princess was the ladle floating on the water.
I mean, the ladle floating. I had it as a metal ladle.
That's fine. And the ducks are also floating on the water. On the beer. The actual word is not beer, it's mead, interestingly enough, which is a beer made from honey. It's an old style of making beer. So it brings in the honeybee and the beehive. And so you could also say that's the entrance of Dionysius in there too. After this marriage has occurred, everything that's being talked about on the way out is sacred stuff. It's talking about the aspects of the sacred vision of the marriage. But, and a key thing happens there, the way it goes, you can't get out of the other world without a trial. There's always a test before the exit. Always something has to be given up at the exit. Sometimes the exit's the hardest part. He had a hard time going in, but there's also a way going out. He went in through the witch, remember that? Went in through the Baba Yaga. And then on the way out, it has to be a crossing of that river. And the sea king, the underworld king, can't make it across. For him, it's food. So he stays there with that water and the pudding. It's the bread and water of the underworld that he stays with. And they go on across. Which is also that old business of whatever union occurs inside has to be brought back has to be brought back the way Blake is saying. It has to become a work in the world. It has to become art. It has to be something that manifests in the world, not just in the interior. And they don't partake exactly of the water of the well and of the beer and of the pudding and of the things occurring in the church. They are it. They don't partake of it. They don't eat it. They are it. And the Sea King partakes of it. And that's why he stays there. One of the old rules is you don't eat in the underworld, or else you stay. Or you don't eat on the way out anyway. What else in there? Or maybe try this. Try to tie some of those pieces to the other sections. The third section to the previous sections.
She's still really leading him. When it's time to hear if there are pursuers, it is she that detects them. She's his link to what's actually happening.
Okay. She has the quality of listening highly developed. He can listen to her. She can listen through the ground.
Michael, is there a hint of incest when she tells him, when he kisses her sister, that she'll forget her?
Yeah. Etheridge has grabbed onto a big twist at the end of the story. A little bit of an unusual twist. Although good stories are wonderful in the way they repeat. We'll get to that one. We'll go all the way back to the beginning, and remember the eagle flies to his younger sister's place, and she doesn't accept the king, the father of this prince. She sets the dogs on him. And then the eagle vision, the sky god vision, the cosmic father vision, burns that sister and her house right out. Same thing happens to the next one. So 2 sisters are burned out. Only the eldest sister, who stays right with the mother, survives it. So then the sister thing comes back in now when the spoonbills come in. And there's 12 of them now. But they're in the lower world, and they're associated with water. And they also have the information of how to deal with the father, how to deal with the lower king, the lower father.
They're in the world of time, the 12.
And they're in time.
They're in the world of time.
How's that?
Because of the 12.
Oh, okay. 12 is the clock.
Yeah, the clock and the complete cycle on, the
And the
cosmic
12 months in the cosmic cycle. Right.
Is there some connection between then the first sisters were actually the prince's aunts?
The what?
That was the father's sister. The prince wasn't born yet.
No, they're the Eagle sisters. But, so he's the prince, the son of the father, then through sisters gains access to this lower world of the Dark Sea King, but also of the Crystal Bridge, of all the magnificent garden, and so on and so forth. Huh? He's moved through the sisters, again, you could say. And then it comes to another change. Always at the end of stories, getting out of this thing requires that you do something that's never been done before. So, incest probably would be if he kissed a sister and simply stayed in that relationship, you would say, I guess, there's incest in the soul. That his relationship to the soul at that point is incestuous. He's been through enough. He's been through an actual initiation of the soul, and he's in a marriage relationship, in a marriage union with what was sisterly, you could say. And he has to now change his way of seeing the feminine altogether, of being with the feminine altogether, and if he stays with the sister, then it is incest.
What happened there is that
It's as if he would forget the woman, whatever the hell.
Vasilissa.
Vasilissa, because she, remember, has a bird nature.
Yeah.
She brings in the other world, whereas the sister is the family component.
Okay.
And if he kisses that, he forgets the other world, and he's back into the humanistic, secular world of the family, where all those attachments take over again.
Right, and so that's why the doves
Yeah.
bring him back to Vasilissa. It's another mutation of the bird thing that started with the eagle. So the birds and the feminine are paralleled all the way through, which is the old bird of the soul. It's the Holy Ghost.
In other versions of the story, he loses it if he kisses his mother and father on both cheeks.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing that Jim was
Yeah,
saying.
the
He
family.
will be pulled back in.
Yeah. Yeah.
All of the companions, or first of all, Baba Yaga prophesied, told them how to get the companions. The other woman gave them the first three companions. Vasilissa gave them the final three companions. And all of the companions were given by non-relatives. The sister would, at the end, would make them forget others. So the feminine doesn't come through the sister.
Okay. That's good too. And I think there's a connection between the feminine and the opening of eros to the companions, to the helpers, who turn out to be old men. Notice again, it's the old priest and the old man by the well. It's the old eater and the old drinker. It's all the underworld, ancestral, old fallen gods, if you want. The fallen gods is who are brought into connectedness, eros, with the youth, with the prince, with the spirit of life that at one point was lost by the seashore kind of thing.
Well, that was the question. Now, are these actual transformations to old men, or are these the guys? Because at no place in the story is he active in anything to extricate himself except in these two instances.
Okay.
And he hasn't been active in the story at all, except in these two cases.
Yeah. This is the way of talking of the soul. This is not about the ego. This is not about the heroic struggle to accomplish things. This is the soul. This is the business of the soul, which has much more to do. Jim mentioned earlier, the first section of the story has the shot of the arrow. The eagle taken right off for the heights, getting the big view, burning a few things out along the way, and stuff like that. It just happens that way. It never looks back either. The eagle itself doesn't look back. It says to the king, look behind, what do you see? The energy of that eagle, that high spirit, never looks back. It heads right into the sun. By doing that, it creates the largest possible shadow, of course. The thing closest to the light makes the biggest shadow. The shadow of that is so big that it obliterates the fact that the king had a son. He's not even there when the son is born and doesn't know about it. He does not know of the existence of this son, this other son. He only knows of the eagle, bright sun up there. Doesn't know of this other son. The other son, to me, the prince, the one that is born unawares of the eagle flight, that one is the one that has the business of eros, the business of connectedness, the business of the downward movement of the soul, the business of the willingness to follow the path around in the forest and not know where it's going. It has the connectedness eventually to the feminine, which leads to the multiple connection to old helpers, to the old souls in each one of us that can help each other through things. It's the other movement, unawares. The eagle is and the king are unaware of it. It's that one.
So therefore the son had to reject
this. The two aspects of the sister is very good. The two aspects of the sister, one of them is way up in the sky with the mother, with the sky mother. That eldest sister that stays up there with the mother, and then the other eldest sister is with the father and mother in the kingdom. So there's something about that. But there's a third eldest sister that has the appearance of a spoonbill and is down in with the sea king. And of course, Aphrodite was born out of the sea, out of the male member falling into the sea. That gives the birth to Aphrodite. So there's a connection between Vasilissa the wise and Aphrodite, a third kind of feminine.
Also
No.
through the dove.
And the dove, the bird of Aphrodite. And flowering bushes and the fruit on the trees, all of the voluptuous production of Aphrodite, of Eros also. And so in that movement, nothing is required. It isn't the movement of heroic, of struggle, of charging out, of being accurate with the arrow, of having the big vision from above. It isn't that at all. It happens as if by magic.
You know, one could say, if you put it into a when-then, when he can't hear, then she hears. So it's very possible that the heroic ear has not to hear so that the soul's ear can hear. Instead of seeing him only as passive, I was just trying to understand why all the time he is that way. It is so that his soul is active. Okay. If we take him as the figure of the story.
I want to follow two things there: passive and listening, which is considered passive. Passive, I think you said earlier, passive is in passion. Passion requires a reception. One is taken by passion. One is, rapture was used. Passion has a suffering in it, has an open wound in it. And so there's a passive aspect in the sense of something that is open and accepting in passion. And a lot of what happens in the crystal bridge and the garden and everything, to me, is an expression of passion, as well as the appetites of eating and drinking and the hot and cold. Those are passions. That's the consuming nature of passion. So the passiveness, the willingness to accept or suffer, seems important. And then the listening makes me think of this issue where one of the hardest things for men to do is to listen to women. And we've been through that. Robert, remember we did that? One time, we're doing a conference of, what?
He wasn't listening.
He wasn't listening. We're doing a conference of men and women, and then we separated for 3 days. And Robert had the idea to come back and form concentric circles. And first, the men would be circled in the center, and the women would be circled on the outside. I mean, we're using the form of the soul, the circular form. And then the men were to talk about what they always wanted to say to women, or to each other about women. And then the outer circle, the women in this case, were to listen. So the men started in, there's about 50 men. And men said incredible things. I mean, one man just screamed, unbearably almost, loud, painful scream, "Fuck you, mother." That's what he wanted women to hear. It was kind of a brutal place to start, but that's what he had to do. The women listened and didn't say a word. Other men started to talk. I want women to get off my back. I want women to stop taking care of me. I want women to know that I have my own sense of romance. I want women to know this. I want women to know that. Blah, 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 blah. Went on for probably 45 minutes or an hour. Every man, 50 men had their say, and the women sat there quiet as a church. And then we switched. The men got in the middle, the men got on the outside, and the women got on the inside. And the women started to talk. And the first woman said something about, "I want men to understand that they're not my father." And the guy says, "I'm not your fucking father." And everybody says, "Be quiet." And so then the next woman says, "I want men to understand that women have a sense of humor as well as men." Another guy says, "We know that women have a sense of humor." It went on and on. We had to actually stop. The men had to lock arms. We had to, make this incredible connection of holding not just hands, locked arms, in order not to talk. Every time a woman would say something, men wanted to talk. It was almost impossible to listen. Okay, so listening. Oh, it was a tremendous experience.
Why is that? Because of ego, or?
Yeah, because of sight. One of the distinctions I make is the distinction between the sense of the eyes and the sense of the ears. The ear is an opening. There's an opening in the eye, but it's very small. The ear is a larger opening. And as Etheridge says, when I talk, the bones in your ear move. So there's a receptivity, an allowance of the bones to be moved by the waves of sound coming in the ear.
Plus the ear doesn't have an eyelid.
And the ear doesn't have an eyelid, in most cases.
Well, that's really,
Yeah, it has nothing to close it. It's always open.
And you can't focus it, really.
And you can't focus it except by turning your head, by being turned, by allowing yourself to be pulled by the sound. So, I mean, if you were going to talk about senses and gender, you might say that the eye is masculine and the ear is feminine, or the eye, you could say the eye is ego and the ear is soul, or, whatever you want. It's a different style of experiencing the world. And women have a lot more patience in that area. And more patience, I think, specifically for the sound of men's voices.
Well, we have a hard time accepting the penis, and in this case, it's like mind fucking, listening, being penetrated.
Good point. It's being penetrated by someone else's spirit, as Jim has said in the past. And when it comes to being penetrated by the spirit of a woman, that seems to be bottom line. Most men say, I'm getting out. You know that point where you start arguing with the woman, and after a while, it's just the sound of her voice that's getting you. Women say, you don't listen to me. I can't hear you. I can't hear a single word. All I can hear is if the same words went through a bullhorn, I'd have a better chance. It's the pitch. The literal pitch is what gets me. It's like a dog. The sound of it, just the way a high sound can drive a dog crazy. And so women say that men never hear them, and they're absolutely right, I think. It's completely true. Men not only don't listen, they can't hear when they do listen. So the whole middle and second and third part of the story has a lot to do with the ear, and a lot of the old stories do. And in some stories, there's magic things come out of the ears. So the ear is the source of a lot of magic and a particular relationship in the feminine way, so that when he goes down to listen to the ground, he cannot hear what's coming. They're talking about prophecy. She can hear the future from the ground. She can hear what's coming along the ground by listening. And he can't, because he hears he doesn't have the developed ear.
To follow that just another step, the pursuers don't stay long enough to listen. They don't know how to hear either.
Very good, very good, very good. And,
Michael, does the feminine aspect of the earth have something to do with this transmitting of sound that she can hear?
Yeah, it keeps saying damp earth. They're making some suggestions about the earth quality and so on.
To me, that indicates that he can't hear through his feminine part.
No, he only can hear through his feminine part. I think is what Jim is saying. It's when he stops even trying to listen that she hears.
Well, Jim, I'd like to maybe even take that one step further. When he's dealing with the pursuit of the father after him again, he does the talking then, and she is silent. She's this silent thing, and in that world, in that language, that is a way to handle it. It's not that, that masculine voice is necessary.
The old man does the talking.
Yeah.
I had a feeling that when, in those two instances where the priest and the old man by the well are talking, that there's a quality of Hermes there, the trickster, to kind of throw them off and they finally lose patience.
Yeah. There's all that old Hermetic wisdom around wells and around churches and towers, and all of that is going on.
She gives access to that old man. I mean, she's the one that changes him.
She turns him, and they keep using the word turns. And again, if you stay with the ear has to turn. Walton talks, and I have to turn to hear him. I mean, there's this incredible stuff built into stories. The willingness to turn and not have the single vision of the eagle that just keeps going and burning things along the way. All right, now, we've got about 15 minutes, and I would like to see what happens if we tie this into passion and purpose. So, 3 things. Just, if you're going to speak, have an image in what you say. An image always draws on an emotion. Emotion and image go together. Where there's emotion, there's an image available. Where there's an image, it makes an emotion available. So have an image and an emotion, and then relate it to either passion or purpose. And so you can start with any of the three. You can start with passion and say, the image that has passion in it for me is this. The image that has purpose is this. Or you can start with the emotion you feel, and you know what I mean. But try and catch those three in whatever you say. And the way you know what it is by trusting yourself. The detail in the story that you can hold, that you can see, the image, is the door into the story, the door into the emotion, the door into the passion, the door into the purpose for you. Lyle.
The image that I had was when, I forget her name, Vasilissa goes to the old woman when she's been rejected by the prince, and goes to the old woman, and she's pissed, angry. She has to get back at him. And what happened to me is that when I ignore, the emotion that I have is when I ignore inside of myself that feminine part of me that wants to direct and say, here's how you're going to do it, here's how you're going to receive the information. She gets pissed, and she takes it out of me in some other way.
Okay, that's good. So he's got the emotion of the anger, and it occurs when she goes to the old woman's house. And I would back up just a little, because it made me imagine the idea of going back to visit my mother and father, and then leaving my soul standing in the street. As if my soul is simply not allowed into the house of my mother and father. And that once I step in there, I'm unsold, or, you know what I mean. I've sold out. Yeah. And that's why I feel so small when I'm there, and afterwards.
And that's why you kissed your sister. Because you need soul. I mean,
you need something, and that was the old soul. In the family, the soul literally was my sister, two of them. You know, it's the old thing of projection. The projection of the soul is put on the sister. You fall in love with your sister, and blah, blah, blah. That was good.
I had the image of the spoonbill and how she could change form, basically. I was almost envy of that. I mentioned that the other day. Because I wish I could get out of my ulro and out of my self-pity and out of my passivity and into a passion and purpose to fly up and beyond it. And I just was really, I saw that being able to change the cloak, and I think you really want that.
That's good. So he's got the image of the cloak and envy. Envy.
Use it.
Yeah.
Desire.
And envy is a
desire.
A captured desire. Mm-hmm. Envy is a captured desire.
Yeah. Yes.
Right? It's a desire that has a metal fence around it. So that's why the cloak coming off is so attractive. This, by the way, I think what we're doing is, this is mythological thinking. Mm-hmm. Following the image and then finding all the ground that comes with it.
I have the image of him sitting at the wedding table at the end, fixing to marry something he doesn't want, or he doesn't see, because he has lost his purpose. He has forgotten. And that's what I do. I get tied up with all the shit out there, and if I get what I'm here for.
Okay, and then what's the emotion?
Right now it's loss.
Loss, yeah. Okay. Sorrow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's been brought up a couple of times. You know, in this, for us, what do we do with any purpose or passion we might find when we're working together here? How do we stay with it back there, not simply forget it and then start being lost again?
The image at the end of the first story when she said to him that I think we have to leave is a very passionate, powerful moment for me, because Robert mentioned also before about the Hindus and about non-attachment being one of the things also is the concept of action. And at that point, you realize that you have to do something, and you have to go, and that is.
Okay, and what's the feeling with that? What's the emotion with that?
The emotion is that you must move or else. That there's
and what causes you to go or else?
Fear.
Okay.
And also this feeling of there's something out there beyond that is calling me and is necessary for me.
partly why I'm here. Those images, those male images, or something that's calling to me.
Sounded to me like it was a female image. It was a feminine image that was giving the information. And then...
But isn't that part of the image of the soul?
Yeah, but suddenly you jumped to male images out there when it sounded more like it was a female image right next to him that was saying, hey, we're in danger.
Isn't that part of him, though?
Yeah, it can be seen as part of him. But then it would be the female part or the feminine part.
The image that got me was when he was being pursued and he would be transformed into the old man. And the wit that the old man was able to use in the face of danger.
Okay, which old man?
Either the first or the second.
It's got to be one or the other.
Well, the first one at the well.
And at what point? See, the detail is exact.
When the pursuers came up and he didn't answer it straight. And the wit that he used in answering.
Okay, what was witty? What was witty?
The way he basically spun a metaphor around the question.
Which metaphor?
And didn't answer him directly.
He's saying what metaphor? See, the image is the metaphor. What metaphor?
Okay, in terms of the question of answering to did he see him or not, the indirect.
What was the metaphor? What was the indirectness?
The thing that struck me was the wit and the way he answered.
And in the wit, if you had to paint a picture of the wit, what would be in the picture?
Reflection.
No, it's his wit.
One step back, what you're standing back saying this was witty.
Reach into it. The image has shape and form.
Okay.
So if it's the first one, he was talking about the depression made by the hoof of the horse in the damp earth. That's an image.
Okay.
The hoof, the depression of the hoof left by the hoof of the horse. The depression in the dark earth is an image. So grab an image.
Okay. The image I had was, no, it's not what you're trying to get at, was the full answer, but in particular, the one that struck me was the wind.
Okay, that's it.
That was probably the other.
That's it. That's why you're having a hard time saying it, because you can't see the wind.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It was the seeing it but not seeing it.
Yeah.
And the feeling that I got there was the ability to be able to step out of a situation of danger and use the wit. I found that very exhilarating. When you're pursuing your purpose and you're feeling that you're being attacked, that instead of directly confronting it, that you use your wit.
Okay. Okay. So the image has something to do with the wind, and the feeling has something to do with exhilaration.
Yeah. To be able to overcome the pursuers with that type of defense.
A couple minutes.
How are we doing here? But I mean, how are we doing in terms of what we're doing? Are we just drifting away from it, or what?
Can you tie this whole story together? It's a story, it's an example of our relationship.
Okay, the question's a good one, but what I want to do is I want to hear where you found passion in it, or where you saw purpose in it, and what image that, in other words, to go on and do something with anything, you have to have something to hold on to, and what you hold on to from stories is images. And then you work the ground of that image, then you can play with the psychology of it, or you can make art out of it, or you can do whatever you want. But if you don't have the image, then all you have is the vague summing up of the story. And the story, the sum is in the part. The story's in the image. So an image, good.
The image I had was a drinker looking at these kegs and just like he's out there consuming and taking them in, and it's like there's a delight. The emotion is one of delight.
Okay. And then what can you do with that?
What you do with that is have an attitude towards that which you are having passion for, as of a delight in taking in that new thing and going after that new thing.
Okay. Going after it with enough desire, enough appetite to drink in more than anybody has of it. More than anybody knows of it. That's desire. That moves it from, I need something watery, to I'll take all the liquids that exist in the world in whatever shape, form, color, or otherwise. Now. That's why I say there's passion in the appetite. That's the passion. then the form becomes whatever you want. Good.
What touched me real deeply was the...
I'm saying him, then you.
Sharp frost.
Sharp frost.
Sharp frost was the image. And my enormous desire for marriage had to be tempered by my fear of that same marriage before it was habitable.
Okay. All right. So he's found an attachment to that cool. So that, then there's something you can do with that. I mean, maybe even in the poems you can do something with that. You can run some cool through the poems when the toxic waste's getting too hot.
I found myself, when they landed on the island, when the king landed on the island and started looking in the casks, I started crying. And I didn't quite know yet that what was going on was that he would be offered a bargain which would involve selling out his son. But I started crying even before that. It was like I could feel it coming. And that's my grief in my own life. Every time I do a piece with fathers and sons, my stuff just comes up in spades. And my life purpose is to create a safe planet for empowering men.
To create a safe planet to empower men.
Yeah.
Well, I can see why you're crying about that. The story seems to say almost the opposite. The king on the island is alone because... You're saying that's what's hitting. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Because he has empowerment in a huge way. Without...
And he's using it, and he's misusing it in a kind of a greedy, mercantile way.
Okay,
so it's also part of my work with CEOs. All that stuff.
Remember what you said about the CEOs? Very good. Very good. That's the coffers.
Yeah. That's my father selling me out.
Okay. That's the coffers of the CEOs.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good. I'm trying to get people that haven't spoken. You and how much?
Next time.
Okay. You and then David. You finish it.
I picture myself the white dove up in the rafters, looking across the rafters at the other dove, the female dove, holding the cheese in her mouth, and saying she wouldn't join me because of what that guy down there did. And first I was totally passive. And when I heard the gentleman here say, you're too far away from it, step into it, he said, what I wanted to do was fly across the room and take the cheese out of her mouth.
Okay. So, and what is the feeling?
See, the feeling I have is don't ask it for it, take it.
You're saying that, but you look more sad about it than you do angry about it.
Well, it's sad because my first inclination was to sit there and do nothing.
Okay. Well, what she's saying is listen. Anyway, good.
My image is when they are men that the pursuers overtake them, and they're relatively helpless, but he's even more helpless as an old man. And so he assumes an even more helpless state. Then they ask, have you seen? And he responds with playfulness in the face of fear. By seen, do you mean? And just runs around in circles. And the playfulness can be more powerful than fear.
Okay. And the helplessness is a very good word. He's been helpless ever since.
He's always born.
Well, we don't know, but we know for sure that since he met Vasilissa, really, he's been helpless. And
there's a big message in that.
Yes.
Because his soul is developing in his ego's helplessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because he follows the soul.
And his passion is developing in his ego's helplessness too. I mean, the eating passion, the drinking passion, the wit passion, all of these basic, elemental, eruptive, playful forces are developing in the absence of the ego project, or whatever you want to call it.
But they had to come after a certain time of grieving.
And there's continual grieving. He weeps after each magical occurrence. He's saying he weeps at the table when the wrong marriage is about to occur. There's a weeping all the way through. Okay, we're going to go do a naming circle? Okay, naming circle.